Today, Oheka Castle is perfectly maintained and fundamentally altered. The stone is clean. The lawns are exact. The rooms are booked months in advance. Nothing appears broken. And yet, something essential has been removed. This was not built to be preserved. It was built to dominate, to stand above the landscape and make wealth feel permanent, unchallenged, unquestioned. Its size was not decorative. Its distance from the road was intentional. Privacy here was not comfort, it was authority made architectural. What survives now is the body, not the function. The structure still commands the hilltop, but its original purpose has been hollowed out and carefully replaced. Where control once lived, access now circulates. Where silence once signaled power, scheduled admiration fills the rooms. The building remains impressive, but it no longer governs anything. Oheka Castle matters because it reveals what happens when institutions outlive the systems that justified them. It shows how old money adapts when permanence fails, how estates become experiences, how dominance is softened into spectacle without appearing to disappear. This is not a story about a mansion falling into ruin. It is a story about survival through transformation and the cost of that survival. About a structure that still stands tall, while the ideology that created it has quietly retreated. To understand Oheka Castle is to understand how American wealth learned to endure without ruling, and how power learned to exit without collapse. Oheka Castle does not announce itself as diminished. It rises from the Long Island hillside with deliberate confidence, its limestone facade intact, its proportions unchanged. The symmetry remains precise. The approach still curves upward, shielding the structure from casual intrusion. From a distance, the building appears untouched by time's bargaining. It looks complete. Yet the present-day estate functions according to an entirely different logic than the one that shaped it. The castle now operates smoothly, efficiently, almost flawlessly. Its systems are optimized. Its surfaces are maintained. Its calendar is full. It has become a place of managed access, carefully controlled openness, and continuous circulation. Nothing about it suggests neglect, and that is precisely the rupture. The building no longer commands a closed world. It hosts one. Where authority once radiated outward, coordination now moves inward. The rooms are no longer arranged to govern behavior, but to accommodate it. The long corridors that once enforced distance now guide guests gently forward. The halls no longer separate classes or functions, they connect experiences. The estate has learned how to receive. This shift did not damage the structure, it preserved it. But preservation is not continuity. What survives is the shell of a system whose original purpose has been removed without visible trauma. The castle still stands, but it does not rule. In its current form, Oheka Castle exists within a modern economy of maintenance rather than dominance. Its survival depends on relevance, not inheritance. Schedules replace silence. Staffing is no longer invisible. Labor sustaining an elite household. It is visible service sustaining an operation. Every function is justified. Every space is monetized indirectly, if not explicitly. The building works constantly to explain itself. The transformation is subtle enough to feel natural. Nothing here declares loss. Yet the building's original authority required absence. Absence of the public, absence of explanation, absence of accessibility. Power once lived in what could not be entered, not what could be admired. That condition no longer exists. Today, Oheka Castle performs stability. It offers continuity without control. The estate's authority has been translated into assurance. Assurance that it will remain, that it will be usable, that it will not disappear. This is a quieter contract than the one it once enforced, but it is binding all the same. The castle survives by agreeing not to dominate. What has been removed is not wealth or beauty, but command. The building no longer organizes a private universe around itself. It does not dictate who belongs and who does not. Instead, it negotiates constantly with the present. Its meaning must be legible to visitors who arrive without obligation, without loyalty, without fear. The stone remains heavy, but the pressure has lifted. This is not decay, it is adaptation. The estate has exchanged authority for endurance. In doing so, it reveals a larger pattern. Institutions built to assert permanence rarely collapse outright. They learn to soften. They exchange closure for openness, command for invitation, secrecy for curation. The rupture, then, is not visual, it is structural. Oheka Castle no longer exists as a governing entity. It exists as a managed artifact, carefully alive, meticulously functional, and fundamentally detached from the system that once made its existence inevitable. The building stands, the system does not. The change in authority is most visible not in what has been added, but in what has disappeared. There is no longer a threshold that must be earned. Entry does not require recognition, lineage, or purpose. The gate still exists, but it no longer filters power. It manages flow. Arrival has been standardized. Inside, the building's discipline has shifted. Spaces once designed to impose scale now reassure proportion. Rooms still impress, but they do not unsettle. The ceiling heights no longer remind occupants of their relative smallness. They frame photographs. The architecture has learned to cooperate with the gaze rather than resist it. Grandeur is no longer directional, it is ambient. This is the central adjustment. The castle has become interpretable. Its presence no longer relies on inherited knowledge or unspoken rules. Meaning is now supplied externally, through explanations, narratives, scheduling, and context. The building no longer assumes understanding, it provides it. Such a condition would have been incompatible with its original function. Authority depended on opacity. Power was reinforced by what was not clarified, not justified, not translated. The estate once required silence to remain intact. Today, it must speak continuously to remain relevant. Even the labor has changed character. Work here is no longer about sustaining a private world in perpetuity. It is about continuity through performance. Maintenance is visible, regulated, and accountable. The rhythms of the estate align with expectation rather than command. Nothing happens without explanation. Nothing exists without a reason that can be stated. The castle's endurance now relies on public legitimacy rather than private supremacy. It exists within a network of approvals, cultural, economic, logistical, that must be renewed constantly. The building is no longer self-authorizing. Its authority is conditional. This conditionality reshapes everything. The estate cannot afford withdrawal. It must remain legible, attractive, operational. Silence has become a liability. Isolation is no longer protective. The hilltop still offers distance, but not separation. The castle's relationship with the outside world is no longer defensive. It is transactional. And yet, the structure resists complete translation. The stone retains a memory of weight that cannot be curated away. Certain alignments still enforce hierarchy unintentionally. The approach still elevates. The mass still presses downward. These remnants do not function as authority, but they persist as pressure, subtle, unassigned, unresolved. What remains is a building suspended between systems. It is neither ruined nor commanding, neither private nor fully public. It has learned how to exist without ruling, but it has not forgotten that it once did. The walls do not announce this contradiction, they absorb it. The rupture, then, is ongoing. Preservation has not frozen the castle in time, it has placed it in a continuous state of negotiation. Every event, every visitor, every act of maintenance reaffirms the same compromise: survival without dominance. This is the quiet condition of many institutions that outlive their authority. They remain impressive, functional, admired. But they no longer determine the world around them. They respond to it. Oheka Castle still stands because it agreed to change what standing meant. The hill was not chosen for its view alone. It was chosen for what distance does to perception. Elevation separates without confrontation. It allows power to be seen without being approached, acknowledged without being tested. From this height, the surrounding land does not merely unfold, it submits. Oheka Castle's position was a cultural decision embedded into geography. The rise of the terrain created a natural hierarchy long before architecture completed the gesture. Roads bend. Sightlines lengthen. Arrival becomes gradual, controlled, and intentional. Nothing here is accidental. The hill performs the first act of authority before stone is ever encountered. This elevation mattered because elite identity in this period required more than wealth. It required legibility. Power needed to be visible, but not accessible. Proximity diluted distinction. Distance refined it. The hill made separation appear natural rather than enforced. Those below did not feel excluded, they felt oriented. Landscape, in this context, was not scenery, it was infrastructure. The estate's scale amplified this effect. The building does not sit lightly on the hill, it occupies it. The mass is proportioned to dominate the rise rather than adapt to it. The structure appears to command the terrain, not coexist with it. This relationship between building and land communicates something essential. Ownership here is not limited to walls and rooms. It extends outward, implied rather than stated. Such placement transformed the estate into a landmark of social order. One did not need to enter the castle to understand its function. Visibility alone was sufficient. The building's presence reorganized the surrounding environment into a hierarchy of reference. Roads led toward it. Views deferred to it. The hill became a fixed point around which status could be silently measured. Isolation reinforced this logic. Oheka was not embedded within a village or neighborhood. It did not share boundaries easily. The space around it was intentionally sparse, allowing the estate to exist without competition or interruption. This absence of adjacency was not emptiness, it was control exercised through restraint. Elite power required insulation. Not privacy, but insulation. The ability to remain untouched by fluctuation. Noise, proximity, and unpredictability weakened authority by introducing negotiation. The hill eliminated negotiation. It imposed distance as a condition of engagement. Importantly, this was not withdrawal. The estate was not hidden. It was visible by design. The isolation was directional, outward-facing, not inward-closing. Those below could see the castle clearly. The castle did not need to see them. This asymmetry mattered. Visibility without reciprocity is a fundamental feature of hierarchy. The hill ensured that the estate could be observed without being answered. It created a one-way relationship between power and environment. In this way, Oheka's location functioned as cultural architecture before cultural architecture was named. The hill encoded assumptions about who belonged above and who belonged below, without signage or enforcement. It transformed wealth into order. Such places were necessary because elite identity required stability that could not be argued with. Money alone fluctuated, titles could be questioned, but geography, once claimed and shaped, appeared permanent. The hill gave wealth a physical anchor, making status feel inevitable rather than acquired. The estate did not merely occupy the hill, it relied on it to complete its meaning. The hill also structured behavior long before any human interaction occurred. Approach was regulated by incline, by curvature, by the slow narrowing of access. Arrival was never abrupt. Time expanded as one moved upward. This delay was not incidental. It prepared the visitor to accept asymmetry before crossing a threshold. By the time the building was reached, hierarchy had already been rehearsed. This was crucial to elite identity. Power that must be asserted repeatedly is unstable. The most durable authority is absorbed unconsciously. The hill performed this absorption. It trained the body to understand position through effort, through assent, through controlled anticipation. The environment taught deference before any words were exchanged. Such spatial conditioning extended beyond guests. The estate's staff, its service routes, and its operational rhythms were also shaped by elevation and separation. Labor occurred along different paths, at different heights, often out of sight. The landscape enforced distinctions between roles as effectively as walls. Geography became an organizing principle. The broader cultural function of estates like Oheka rested on this seamless integration of land and hierarchy. These places were not retreats from society, they were demonstrations of its intended structure. They expressed an ideal in which power appeared stable, earned, and naturally elevated. The hill was not merely symbolic, it was instructional. This mattered because elite identity during this period depended on coherence. Wealth alone was insufficient unless it could be situated within a narrative of order. The estate on the hill offered that narrative without explanation. It presented authority as spatial fact rather than social agreement. The visibility of the estate reinforced this message across the surrounding region. It stood as a reference point, a constant reminder of scale and proportion. Even those who never approached it understood its presence. The hill allowed power to exist in the public imagination without requiring participation. That distance preserved mystique. Crucially, this form of dominance did not rely on exclusion through barriers. There were no walls enclosing the landscape itself. Instead, elevation and openness did the work quietly. The estate did not push others away, it positioned itself above them. This distinction made hierarchy feel less imposed and more observed. Over time, such placement normalized inequality by embedding it into the environment. The hill suggested that some vantage points were meant to be occupied permanently, not contested. It implied that stability came from remaining above, not moving among. The estate's relationship to the land made privilege appear disciplined rather than excessive. This is why the hill mattered more than the building alone. Without elevation, the architecture would have spoken loudly. With it, the message became effortless. The estate did not need to explain itself. Its position did the work. When later systems would remove or soften this logic, the building would remain, but the hill would lose its instructional role. What had once organized perception would become scenery. The elevation would still exist, but its meaning would no longer be enforced. For a time, however, the hill ensured that power was not just held, it was placed. Oheka Castle was not conceived as a personal indulgence. It was conceived as a declaration. Its creation followed a logic shaped by scale, timing, and intent, not by domestic need or aesthetic curiosity. This was not a residence designed to be lived in quietly. It was an institution designed to exist publicly, even in isolation. The decision to build at such magnitude signaled arrival in a system that did not recognize wealth until it could no longer be ignored. Financial success alone was insufficient. Money had to be translated into form, into something immovable, undeniable, and resistant to reinterpretation. The estate served that purpose. It converted liquidity into mass. Every major design choice reflects this conversion. The symmetry is exacting, not expressive. Ornamentation is restrained, not playful. The structure does not experiment or adapt, it asserts. These decisions were not about beauty as such, they were about credibility. The building needed to look inevitable, as though it could not have been otherwise. This inevitability was ideological. Oheka Castle was built to suggest permanence in a world that was, beneath the surface, increasingly volatile. Industrial wealth moved quickly, accumulated rapidly, and disrupted older hierarchies. Such speed created suspicion. The estate countered that suspicion by slowing everything down. Stone replaces motion. Geometry replaces chance. The building stands as proof that new wealth could behave like old power. The scale of the project reinforced this message. Excess here was not decorative, it was structural. The estate's size exceeded functional necessity deliberately. Rooms did not exist because they were needed. They existed because they could. This surplus communicated security. Only a system confident in its future would build beyond use. Importantly, the castle does not advertise comfort. Its spaces are not intimate. Proportions are formal. The building does not invite relaxation. It enforces awareness. This was intentional. Comfort suggests private life. Oheka was designed to transcend privacy. It was meant to operate as a visible marker of status rather than a refuge from the world. The logic extended to materials. Stone was chosen not only for durability, but for association. It linked the estate to older traditions of authority, palaces, fortresses, civic monuments. These references were not nostalgic, they were strategic. The building aligned itself with systems that predated the fortunes that financed it, borrowing their gravity. In this way, the estate functioned as a corrective narrative. It reframed recent financial ascent as continuity rather than disruption. The castle suggested that wealth had not merely arrived, it had settled. It had assumed responsibility for space, order, and permanence. Such intent distinguishes ideology from vanity. Vanity seeks attention. Ideology seeks legitimacy. Oheka Castle does not ask to be admired. It expects to be recognized. Its design resists interpretation because interpretation implies debate. The building offers no ambiguity. This clarity was essential. The estate was created at a moment when power needed physical reassurance. Markets shifted, industries rose and fell, but stone, once placed, did not fluctuate. The castle anchored financial success to the illusion of permanence, transforming capital into structure. This was the logic of its creation, to make wealth feel finished. This sense of finality shaped how the estate related to time. Oheka Castle was not built to evolve, it was built to arrive complete. Unlike residences that expand organically or adapt across generations, this structure presents itself as resolved from the outset. There is no visible experimentation, no provisional wing, no sense of growth. The design communicates that decisions have already been made and will not be revisited. Such closure was deliberate. Institutions that claim permanence cannot appear in progress. Change suggests vulnerability. Oheka's architecture denies that vulnerability by presenting itself as a finished argument. The building does not invite future modification, it presumes endurance. This presumption also governed the estate's relationship to succession. The castle does not express continuity through lineage or inheritance. It expresses continuity through scale and finish. The implication is that authority has already been secured, independent of who occupies the rooms. The building stands in for the system itself. This distinction matters. Vanity architecture centers the individual. Ideological architecture minimizes the individual in favor of abstraction. Oheka Castle does not reveal personality. It reveals position. Its rooms are not character studies, they are instruments. The estate is less a home than a statement rendered inhabitable. The restraint visible throughout the design reinforces this reading. Excess is controlled, measured, and distributed evenly. There are no whimsical flourishes or expressive risks. Everything serves balance and proportion. This discipline signals seriousness. The building does not perform taste, it performs authority. Even the absence of overt symbolism is meaningful. Power confident in its legitimacy does not require explanation. The castle does not display heraldry or narrative ornamentation. It relies on mass, alignment, and placement to communicate. Its message is structural rather than decorative. By translating wealth into architectural certainty, the estate also insulated that wealth from scrutiny. Stone absorbs criticism. Once capital becomes landscape, it ceases to appear contingent. The castle's presence suggests inevitability rather than choice. It makes success feel less like accumulation and more like outcome. This is the ideological core of Oheka's creation. It was not meant to impress contemporaries alone. It was meant to instruct the future. The building asserts that this form of power belonged here, that it was stable, legitimate, and complete. Such an assertion could only be made once. Afterward, repetition would weaken it. The estate exists as a singular act, not a model to be replicated endlessly. Its scale and certainty depend on that singularity. In time, the system that required such statements would erode. The need to convert wealth into permanence would diminish as permanence itself became suspect. But at the moment of its creation, the logic was sound. Authority needed weight, money needed form. The castle provided both. Oheka Castle was not built to be admired for its beauty. It was built to remove doubt. Oheka Castle did not operate as a household, it operated as a system. The scale of the estate required an organizational logic closer to industry than domestic life. Grandeur on this level could not be sustained by intuition or familiarity. It demanded structure, repetition, and discipline. The building itself encoded this discipline. Its layout was not neutral. Circulation paths were carefully divided, separating visibility from function, presence from service. Movement through the estate was regulated not by rules spoken aloud, but by architecture that anticipated behavior. Certain corridors existed to be seen. Others existed to remain unnoticed. This distinction was enforced daily, without instruction. Labor here was continuous and largely invisible. Staff routines followed fixed patterns that mirrored the building's hierarchy. Work began before presence and ended after it. The estate's public-facing spaces appeared effortless precisely because effort was displaced elsewhere. This displacement was intentional. Authority depended on the illusion of ease. The castle's operation required specialization. Tasks were segmented, timed, and assigned according to rank. No single worker possessed a complete view of the estate as a whole. Knowledge was compartmentalized. This fragmentation ensured efficiency, but it also reinforced control. The system did not rely on loyalty, it relied on structure. Spatial divisions reinforced this order. Living quarters, workspaces, and transitional zones were arranged to prevent overlap. Encounters between roles were regulated by design. The building reduced the need for supervision by embedding supervision into space itself. Walls, staircases, and entrances performed managerial functions silently. This spatial logic extended upward. The upper levels were reserved for visibility and authority. Lower levels absorbed labor and maintenance. Vertical movement mirrored social order. Ascending was not casual. Descending was expected. The building taught its occupants where they belonged through daily repetition. Time, too, was managed. The estate operated on synchronized schedules that aligned labor with appearance. Meals, cleaning, preparation, and withdrawal followed predictable rhythms. These routines created stability. They also minimized disruption. The system absorbed variability by constraining it. Importantly, this was not cruelty, it was order. The estate did not function through constant enforcement or punishment, it functioned through normalization. Once routines were established, deviation became unnecessary. The system perpetuated itself. The castle's authority depended on this internal coherence. Without it, the architecture would have been theatrical rather than operational. Grandeur alone does not govern. It must be supported by mechanisms that translate scale into control. Oheka Castle achieved this through repetition, division, and invisibility. From the perspective of the estate, individuals were interchangeable. What mattered was continuity. Labor was not valued for creativity or initiative, but for reliability. The system rewarded predictability. In return, it offered stability. This arrangement allowed the estate to function as a closed world. Everything necessary to sustain authority existed within its boundaries. Food, maintenance, presentation, and protocol were internally managed. The building did not rely on improvisation. It relied on design. In this way, Oheka Castle operated less as a residence and more as a machine, one calibrated to produce hierarchy daily, without announcement. The structure did not merely house power, it enacted it. This machinery of hierarchy depended on predictability more than obedience. The estate did not require constant assertion of authority because authority had been stabilized into routine. Once patterns were established, they carried forward on their own momentum. The building's design ensured that most interactions occurred within predetermined limits, reducing friction and uncertainty. Protocol governed every visible moment. Public rooms were staged continuously, not for display, but for readiness. They existed in a state of perpetual preparation, as though authority might be exercised at any moment. Nothing appeared provisional. Furniture remained fixed. Objects held position. Disorder would have signaled instability. Order signaled permanence. The separation between visible life and operational life was absolute. Staff movement occurred along alternative routes, often concealed, allowing the estate to appear self-sustaining. The castle seemed to maintain itself. This illusion was central. Power functions best when its maintenance is obscured. By hiding labor, the estate presented authority as natural rather than constructed. Control also extended to sound, light, and timing. Noise was absorbed by distance and thick walls. Activity unfolded quietly. The estate's scale allowed labor to occur without disturbance. Silence was not emptiness, it was regulation. The absence of sound communicated that everything was proceeding as intended. Hierarchy was reinforced through repetition rather than instruction. Individuals learned their position through daily movement, where they could stand, where they could pass, where they were expected to withdraw. The building offered constant feedback. It corrected behavior without confrontation. Over time, this created internal alignment. The system did not need to remind its occupants of rank. They inhabited it. The estate's machine-like function also extended to its social rituals. Formal gatherings, meals, and receptions followed strict choreography. Appearances were timed. Transitions were precise. Nothing disrupted flow. These events were not expressions of leisure, they were demonstrations of control. Social life operated as another system to be managed. What distinguished this operation from mere efficiency was its closed nature. The estate did not depend on external systems to sustain daily order. Supplies entered, but authority did not. Decision-making remained internal, insulated from outside influence. This autonomy reinforced legitimacy. The castle governed itself. Importantly, the system tolerated little ambiguity. Roles were defined narrowly. Movement between categories was rare. This rigidity produced clarity. Everyone understood expectations. Stability was achieved by limiting possibility. The estate functioned smoothly because it did not encourage change. Such a structure could only exist within a specific cultural moment. It required acceptance of hierarchy as normal, even necessary. The building assumed compliance not because it demanded it, but because the surrounding society supplied it. The estate was not an anomaly, it was an intensification. In operation, Oheka Castle demonstrated how architecture, labor, and protocol could merge into a single organism. The building did not simply contain these systems, it synchronized them. Every day, the estate reproduced its own logic through motion, silence, and repetition. This is what allowed authority to feel effortless. Control was not exercised loudly or visibly, it was embedded. The estate functioned without spectacle because it did not need to persuade. It assumed its place. Only when such systems encounter external pressure do their mechanics become visible. But in their moment, they appear seamless. The machine runs quietly, the hierarchy holds, and the building, through its operation, confirms the order it was designed to express. There was a moment when Oheka Castle did not need to justify itself. Its presence required no explanation, its operation no defense. The estate existed within a cultural atmosphere that assumed the permanence of private power. Continuity was not a hope or projection, it was an expectation embedded into daily life. At this peak, the estate functioned without anticipation of disruption. Money circulated smoothly, not as transaction but as condition. Expenses were absorbed rather than calculated. Maintenance was assumed rather than audited. The scale of the building was not questioned because scale itself had not yet become suspect. Size was interpreted as seriousness, not excess. This confidence shaped how the estate related to time. There was no urgency. Decisions unfolded slowly, deliberately, without concern for reversal. The future was treated as an extension of the present, not as an unknown. The building's rhythms reflected this assurance. Seasons changed, but the structure did not respond. It remained constant, indifferent to fluctuation. Private power, in this context, was not aggressive. It did not need to assert itself publicly or compete visibly. Its dominance was quiet, almost administrative. The estate did not seek attention, it expected recognition. That expectation was met by a society still organized around deference to established hierarchies. Social life within the estate reflected this stability. Gatherings were formal but unhurried. Appearances were maintained without strain. The choreography of events suggested confidence rather than performance. Nothing was done to impress an uncertain audience. The audience already understood its role. Crucially, this period was marked by an absence of contingency planning. The estate did not prepare for contraction or adaptation. Its systems were designed to sustain scale, not reduce it. There was no internal logic for retreat. Expansion was conceivable, diminishment was not. The castle's authority during this era rested on a shared cultural agreement. Wealth was accepted as a legitimate organizing force. Privacy was respected as a right of position. Insulation from public scrutiny was not yet framed as problematic. The estate's separation from ordinary life was understood as natural. This agreement extended beyond the estate itself. Institutions, markets, and social norms aligned to support such structures. Private power operated within a broad ecosystem that reinforced its stability. The castle did not stand alone, it stood within a network of assumptions that made its existence unremarkable. Architecture played a reinforcing role rather than a defensive one. The building did not need to persuade skeptics. It simply existed as proof of order. Its scale, materials, and placement resonated with prevailing ideas about success and responsibility. The estate embodied what power was supposed to look like. This was the moment of absolute confidence, when the system believed it had solved the problem of continuity. The estate did not imagine a future in which its authority would need to be explained, negotiated, or softened. It assumed endurance without adaptation. Such moments are rarely recognized while they last. They feel static, almost invisible. Only later do they appear fragile. But at the time, the estate moved forward without hesitation, carrying its certainty forward day by day. This confidence expressed itself most clearly in the absence of restraint. The estate did not operate with an eye toward efficiency or justification. It functioned according to inherited scale, not optimized logic. Resources were deployed generously, sometimes redundantly, because redundancy signaled security. Excess was not a flaw, it was confirmation. The flow of money reinforced this condition. Capital moved without friction, not because it was unlimited, but because its future was assumed. Revenue streams were treated as permanent features rather than variable inputs. The estate's costs did not invite scrutiny because scrutiny itself implied doubt. In this environment, financial discipline would have appeared unnecessary, even inappropriate. Authority, therefore, was exercised indirectly. The estate did not intervene frequently, because intervention suggested instability. Systems were trusted to persist. Staff routines continued uninterrupted. Social rituals repeated themselves with minimal variation. The castle existed in a state of sustained equilibrium, where continuity was maintained through repetition rather than adjustment. Importantly, this era was not marked by innovation. Innovation implies pressure. Instead, the estate emphasized preservation of form. The building remained unchanged. Interiors were maintained rather than refreshed. The goal was not relevance, but consistency. Change would have suggested response. The estate did not respond, it endured. This endurance extended to relationships beyond the estate. Private power during this period was insulated from public challenge. Economic influence did not require visibility. Authority operated through networks rather than confrontation. The castle's role was symbolic rather than transactional. It stood as a stable node within a broader system of private governance. The confidence of this era also shaped expectations about succession. The estate assumed continuity beyond any single generation. Its scale implied longevity. Its finish suggested completion. The building was meant to outlast individual presence, carrying authority forward intact. Planning for decline would have contradicted this assumption. Such certainty depended on cultural alignment. Society still accepted inequality as structural rather than temporary. The concentration of resources did not provoke immediate resistance. The estate's isolation was interpreted as refinement, not detachment. Its authority was buffered by shared norms that treated private dominance as orderly. This alignment allowed the castle to remain inward-facing. It did not engage with external narratives or explanations. Its meaning was self-contained. The estate did not need to articulate its value to those outside its sphere. Its legitimacy was presumed. In hindsight, this period represents not arrogance, but synchronization. The estate functioned smoothly because its internal logic matched the external environment. There was no friction between private power and public expectation. The system did not sense the need to adapt because nothing yet pressed against it. Moments like this are rare because they rely on equilibrium rather than force. They persist only as long as assumptions remain unchallenged. At Oheka Castle, that equilibrium held long enough to feel permanent. The estate moved forward as though its conditions would continue indefinitely. Stone resting easily on hill, systems running quietly beneath the surface, authority embedded so deeply it no longer needed to be noticed. The pressure did not announce itself. There was no single rupture, no dramatic reversal that signaled the end of certainty. Instead, strain entered quietly, through mechanisms that had once been irrelevant. Systems that had sustained private power without question began to demand accounting. Economic conditions shifted first, not as crisis but as recalibration. The assumptions that had allowed wealth to remain inert, embedded safely in land and stone, began to weaken. Capital no longer behaved as a permanent backdrop. It became mobile, contested, subject to scrutiny. What had once been a stable environment for accumulation grew uneven. Taxation altered the balance, not abruptly, but persistently. Costs that had previously been absorbed without attention now required response. The estate's scale, once a symbol of certainty, became a measurable liability. Size translated into obligation, maintenance into exposure. The castle's mass, which had anchored authority, began to register as weight. This shift reframed ownership itself. The estate ceased to function purely as expression. It became responsibility. What had once demonstrated arrival now demanded justification. The castle's presence no longer aligned seamlessly with the economic logic surrounding it. It required defense, explanation, management. Cultural change compounded this strain. The social agreement that had normalized private dominance began to erode. Insulation from public life no longer appeared natural. Distance was reinterpreted as detachment. Grandeur, once read as seriousness, began to suggest excess. The estate's language remained the same, but its audience had changed. Importantly, the castle did not immediately register this shift. Its systems were built for continuity, not responsiveness. The architecture assumed permanence. The routines assumed repetition. There was no internal mechanism for sensing gradual misalignment. The estate was designed to endure pressure, not interpret it. As a result, strain accumulated at the margins. Financial oversight increased. External regulations touched spaces that had once been autonomous. Decisions that had been internal became subject to outside frameworks. The castle's authority encountered limits for the first time, not through confrontation, but through procedure. This was destabilizing precisely because it lacked drama. There was no event to respond to, no adversary to resist. The pressure was systemic. It reframed the estate's existence without challenging its presence directly. The castle still stood. It still functioned, but its logic no longer aligned with the conditions that surrounded it. Ownership, in this context, shifted from affirmation to obligation. The estate required attention in ways it never had before. Maintenance demanded prioritization. Costs demanded reduction. The castle's internal systems, optimized for scale and repetition, were poorly suited to contraction. They resisted adjustment. Cultural confidence gave way to calculation. Decisions that had once been deferred indefinitely now required timelines. The future, once assumed, became uncertain. The estate's relationship to time altered subtly. Endurance could no longer be taken for granted. Continuity required effort. This moment marks the beginning of fracture, not collapse, but misalignment. The castle's architecture still expressed authority, but authority no longer carried the same meaning. The building spoke a language that the surrounding world was slowly unlearning. Pressure had entered without warning because the system had never anticipated it. The estate did not fail. It began, quietly, to strain. As pressure accumulated, the estate's internal coherence began to loosen. The systems that had once operated in harmony, architecture, labor, finance, protocol, no longer reinforced one another automatically. What had been aligned through assumption now required coordination. This shift exposed a fundamental vulnerability. The castle had been designed to project stability, not to negotiate it. Financial scrutiny altered daily operations first. Expenditures that had once flowed invisibly through the estate were now isolated, examined, reduced. Maintenance schedules were reassessed. Staffing levels were questioned. The logic of abundance, so central to the estate's authority, became increasingly difficult to sustain. Each adjustment, however minor, introduced friction into a system built for seamless repetition. This friction revealed the cost of scale. The very size that had once guaranteed legitimacy now multiplied exposure. Every roofline, corridor, and facade demanded upkeep. The estate's mass no longer read as permanence alone. It read as accumulation of obligation. Ownership became an exercise in containment rather than expression. Cultural perception intensified this strain. The castle's isolation, once understood as refinement, began to appear unproductive. Its autonomy attracted attention rather than deference. The estate's distance from ordinary life, previously a source of authority, was reframed as disengagement. This reinterpretation did not require accusation. It emerged gradually, through changing expectations about visibility and responsibility. The castle's authority, once self-sustaining, now depended on external tolerance. Regulatory frameworks expanded. Oversight increased. What had been private governance encountered public logic. The estate did not lose control suddenly. It discovered that control now operated within boundaries it had not set. This discovery altered the meaning of stewardship. Maintaining the estate was no longer a neutral act. It became a decision with economic and cultural consequences. Choices that once reaffirmed stability now invited judgment. The castle could no longer remain silent. Its existence required explanation. Internally, this shift disrupted rhythm. Systems optimized for continuity struggled with adaptation. Protocols that had relied on repetition resisted revision. The estate's machinery could absorb pressure only by slowing, tightening, and eventually recalibrating. Each recalibration weakened the illusion of inevitability. The fracture, however, remained contained. The building did not yet appear diminished. Its presence still commanded attention. Its architecture still conveyed certainty. But beneath this surface, alignment had been lost. The estate was no longer synchronized with the environment that had once sustained it. Ownership, in this phase, became increasingly abstract. The castle was still possessed, but possession no longer carried assurance. It carried responsibility without guarantee. The future could no longer be assumed as extension of the present. The estate had entered a period of negotiation between scale and sustainability, authority and accountability. This negotiation was not resolved quickly. It unfolded gradually, often imperceptibly. The castle continued to operate, drawing on momentum built over decades. But the system that had once made such operation effortless had begun to withdraw its support. Pressure without warning is destabilizing because it offers no clear response. The estate could not resist it outright, nor could it accommodate it without altering its core logic. The castle stood at the edge of transformation, still intact, still functional, but no longer unquestioned. The fracture did not announce an end. It signaled the beginning of adjustment. The system had encountered conditions it was never designed to interpret, and in that encounter, certainty quietly gave way to calculation. The transition did not arrive as abandonment. It arrived as management. Faced with sustained pressure, the estate did not collapse inward or fall silent. Instead, it recalibrated its purpose. What had once been stewardship long-term, unquestioned, and ideologically anchored began to shift toward extraction, measured use, strategic deployment, and operational survival. This was not a failure of care, it was a change in orientation. Stewardship assumes permanence. It justifies cost by continuity and scale by legacy. Extraction assumes contingency. It measures value by output and relevance by use. As the conditions that had supported stewardship eroded, the estate's logic followed. Meaning no longer resided in authority. It migrated toward function. Maintenance became the central priority. Not maintenance as ritual, but maintenance as strategy. Every decision began to orbit around preservation of the structure rather than preservation of its role. The castle was kept intact, but its governing purpose, its capacity to organize a private world, was gradually dismantled. This dismantling was careful. Authority was not removed violently. It was set aside as impractical. The estate no longer justified its scale through command. It justified it through operation. Spaces that had once existed to express hierarchy were reassigned to serve circulation, accommodation, or utility. Rooms were no longer protected by exclusivity, they were activated by use. The building did not shrink, its meaning did. Function replaced authority because function could be defended. Authority could not. In an environment that demanded accountability, the estate learned to explain itself in practical terms. What does this space do? How does it sustain itself? Why should it remain? These were questions the castle had never needed to answer before. Extraction does not imply neglect. It implies prioritization. The estate began to draw value from its own existence. Its presence became an asset rather than an assertion. The building was no longer a system that governed resources. It became a resource to be governed. This shift altered internal relationships. Labor was no longer organized around sustaining an elite household indefinitely. It was reorganized around efficiency, visibility, and output. Roles consolidated. Protocols loosened. The rigid separations that had once enforced hierarchy became obstacles to operation. Flexibility replaced formality. Importantly, this flexibility was not freedom, it was necessity. The castle systems were simplified to reduce friction. Redundancies were removed. Spaces were opened, repurposed, or left dormant. What remained was not the full organism of authority, but a functional core designed to keep the structure viable. Meaning, once embedded in silence and distance, could no longer be sustained. The estate's value now depended on engagement. Presence replaced absence. Accessibility replaced insulation. These were not ideological choices. They were concessions to survival. The governing role of the estate, its capacity to define order independently, was incompatible with this new reality. To remain intact, it had to relinquish that role. Authority, which once justified everything, became the very thing that endangered continuity. Survival demanded surrender not of the building, but of its original purpose. The castle could endure only by agreeing to become something else. This is the pivot point, not decline yet, but conversion. The estate entered a phase where preservation required extraction, and meaning was subordinated to operation. As extraction became normalized, the estate's relationship to time altered again. Decisions were no longer made with generations in mind, but with operational horizons. The future narrowed. Planning became incremental. Long-term vision gave way to immediate viability. The castle's endurance depended on continuous activity rather than assumed inheritance. This change reshaped how space was valued. Rooms were assessed for utility rather than symbolism. Circulation mattered more than hierarchy. Adaptability outweighed coherence. The building began to function as a platform rather than a statement. Its architecture, once final, became provisional in practice even if unchanged in form. Authority dissolved not through opposition, but through redundancy. There was no longer a role for it to play. The estate did not govern a social order, it managed itself. Power had no domain in which to operate. What remained was administration. Extraction also altered perception. The castle was no longer encountered as distant or closed. It entered the realm of scheduled presence. Its isolation softened. Engagement replaced reverence. The building was still impressive, but its impression no longer carried consequence. Admiration did not translate into deference. Internally, this transition required reinterpretation of identity. The estate ceased to understand itself as a fixed center of gravity. It became reactive, attentive to demand, sensitive to relevance. The building listened. It adjusted. These were capacities it had never needed before. This responsiveness, however, came at a cost. Systems designed for authority do not adapt gracefully. Each accommodation strained coherence. Spatial compromises accumulated. Protocols loosened until they no longer reinforced hierarchy at all. What had once been a closed organism became permeable. Extraction also introduced visibility. The processes that had once been hidden became observable. Maintenance, staffing, and operation moved into view. The estate could no longer present itself as self-sustaining. Its survival required explanation, coordination, and justification. The surrender, therefore, was not symbolic, it was functional. The castle relinquished its governing role because governance had become incompatible with endurance. Authority, once its foundation, became excess weight. Yet the building did not disappear. It adapted successfully. Extraction sustained it. The structure remained intact, even impressive. This success complicates the narrative. Survival was achieved not through collapse, but through transformation that stripped away original meaning. What remained was a paradox, a structure preserved precisely because it no longer exercised power. The estate endured by agreeing to be used rather than obeyed, visited rather than deferred to, maintained rather than inherited. This is the quiet violence of extraction. Nothing is destroyed, nothing is overturned, but something essential is removed. The building continues, but its reason for existing has been replaced. From the outside, the castle appears unchanged. From within, its logic has been inverted. What was once the expression of private authority has become a managed artifact, alive, active, and emptied of command. The estate survives. The system that created it does not. What remains of Oheka Castle is not accidental. It is the result of deliberate selection. Preservation, in this context, has not meant total recovery. It has meant careful curation decisions about what can be sustained, what can be displayed, and what must be allowed to disappear quietly. The structure endures because it can be stabilized, stone can be repaired, roof lines can be secured, symmetry can be restored. Architecture lends itself to conservation because it is finite. It can be measured, documented, and returned to a chosen state. The building survives because it can be managed. What cannot survive so easily are the systems that once animated it. The estate's original order depended on conditions that cannot be reconstructed. Authority derived from exclusivity, from insulation, from a social agreement that accepted hierarchy as natural and private power as legitimate. Those conditions are not dormant. They are gone. No amount of restoration can summon them back. Public accessibility marks this boundary clearly. Opening the estate ensures survival, but it also finalizes transformation. Once access becomes routine, authority becomes symbolic at best. The castle can be admired, studied, photographed, but not inhabited as it once was. Presence no longer confers position. It confers experience. Curation replaces governance. The estate now explains itself through narrative rather than command. Its history must be interpreted, contextualized, framed. Meaning is supplied rather than assumed. This explanatory layer is essential to modern survival, but it alters the building's role fundamentally. The castle no longer organizes the world around it. It asks to be understood within it. The cost of this shift is subtle but significant. Preservation prioritizes surfaces over systems. Rooms are returned to appearance, not function. Circulation is restored visually, not hierarchically. What once enforced order now suggests it. The difference is not immediately visible, but it is structural. The building's continued presence creates the illusion of continuity. Stone implies endurance. Layout implies intent. But continuity of form does not equal continuity of power. The estate now operates within limits imposed by relevance and permission. Its existence is justified by cultural value rather than authority. This condition reshapes how the castle is perceived. It becomes an object of interest rather than a center of gravity. Its scale still impresses, but it no longer organizes behavior. Visitors move freely through spaces once governed by protocol. Boundaries that once mattered are now informational rather than enforced. What remains, then, is the vessel. What cannot remain is the original function that gave the vessel coherence. The building stands intact because it no longer carries the weight of command. It has been lightened by removal. Adaptation ensures survival, but it extracts something in return. The estate persists by accepting that it can no longer operate as a closed system. Its meaning must circulate outward, not inward. Authority is replaced by accessibility. Permanence is replaced by maintenance. This is not decline in the traditional sense. Nothing has fallen apart. The loss is not visible as ruin. It is visible as translation. The estate has been converted into something that can exist comfortably within the present, but only by relinquishing what made it structurally complete. The castle remains. The system does not. The cost of adaptation is not borne evenly across what survives. Architecture benefits from preservation because it can be stabilized without contradiction. Systems do not. They require continuity of belief as much as continuity of form. Once belief dissolves, systems cannot be restored, they can only be described. This distinction shapes every encounter with the estate. The building can be walked through, but it cannot be reactivated. Its rooms no longer impose behavior. They host movement. The silence that once disciplined now serves atmosphere. What remains is impression without consequence. Curation introduces a careful flattening of meaning. Hierarchies are explained rather than enforced. Labor becomes historical rather than operational. Authority is referenced rather than exercised. The estate's past is preserved as narrative, not as structure. This allows understanding, but it prevents return. Public access accelerates this process. Once an institution opens itself fully, it accepts translation over autonomy. The castle's survival depends on being legible to those without prior investment. Its meaning must be simplified, contextualized, made shareable. Complexity gives way to clarity. Depth becomes optional. The building's endurance therefore requires constant mediation. Its story must be told repeatedly to justify its scale. The estate cannot remain silent. Silence would suggest irrelevance rather than power. Interpretation replaces assumption. Without explanation, the structure would lose its place. This mediation alters the relationship between past and present. The estate no longer transmits authority directly across time. It offers fragments, rooms, alignments, materials that suggest what once was without reproducing it. Visitors receive access, not position, knowledge, not obligation. What cannot remain is the closed world the estate once sustained. That world depended on insulation, on uninterrupted authority, on a hierarchy that did not require defense. Those conditions cannot be curated. They resist preservation because they were never material alone. They existed in practice. Adaptation preserves the object by abandoning the system. This trade is rarely acknowledged openly, but it is decisive. The castle's continued presence is secured by its transformation into a managed artifact. Its survival is conditional. The loss embedded in this process is not failure. It is resolution. Institutions that cannot adapt disappear. Those that adapt endure in altered form. Oheka Castle survives because it accepted limitation. What remains is a structure that still commands attention, still occupies its hill with confidence. But the confidence now belongs to the building, not to the power that created it. The stone holds memory without authority. This is the cost of adaptation, survival without restoration. The estate continues, but it no longer governs. Its endurance is real, but incomplete. The building stands as evidence not of permanence, but of negotiation. A monument maintained precisely because its original purpose has been set aside. What remains can be preserved. What cannot has already departed, quietly, without ceremony. Oheka Castle did not fall. It withdrew. This distinction matters. Collapse is visible. It announces itself through ruin, abandonment, or scandal. Retreat is quieter. It leaves structures intact while removing the conditions that once animated them. What remains appears stable, even successful, masking the depth of transformation beneath the surface. The estate now stands as evidence of a particular skill developed by elite power, the ability to exit without spectacle. Authority did not resist the changing world directly. It did not fight to maintain dominance through force or confrontation. Instead, it receded, transferring its weight into forms that could persist without governing. This retreat was not improvised. It followed a logic shaped by experience. When systems of private power encounter sustained pressure, their most effective response is often invisibility. To endure, they stop asserting. They stop insisting. They allow function to replace command, presence to replace control. Oheka Castle exemplifies this pattern. The estate did not attempt to restore its original authority once conditions made that authority untenable. It did not seek to reassert exclusivity or rebuild insulation. Instead, it accepted a different role, one that preserved form while abandoning dominance. This is not surrender in the dramatic sense. It is adaptation refined to the point of disappearance. Power did not vanish abruptly. It dissolved into management, curation, and maintenance. What had once organized life now organizes access. Such retreat preserves dignity. There is no public reckoning, no visible defeat. The building continues to function, to impress, to matter. The transition is framed as continuity. The estate appears to have survived intact, even improved. And yet, the system that once justified its existence has quietly exited. This ability to leave without leaving ruins is central to elite endurance. Power that collapses invites examination. Power that withdraws invites nostalgia. Oheka Castle benefits from this distinction. Its presence encourages admiration rather than inquiry. The form remains convincing even after authority has departed. The legacy, then, is not failure. It is transition executed successfully. The estate demonstrates how dominance can be converted into heritage, how control can be translated into cultural value. This conversion allows structures to remain meaningful without remaining powerful. But this success raises a deeper question. 1. The building does not answer directly. Form can survive without power for a time. Stone can be maintained. Layouts can be preserved. Narratives can be curated. But form, once detached from authority, depends entirely on external recognition. It must be wanted. The castle now exists within conditions it does not control. Its endurance relies on relevance, interest, and permission. These are unstable foundations compared to the certainty that once supported it. The estate survives because it is allowed to, not because it commands. This is the unresolved tension at the heart of its legacy. Retreat preserved the structure, but it also exposed it to time in a new way. Without power, form becomes contingent. It must justify itself continuously. Oheka Castle stands as a case study not in decline, but an exit strategy. It shows how elite power learned to step away from authority without triggering collapse. The building remains impressive and composed, carrying the memory of dominance without exercising it. What it cannot reveal is how long such an arrangement can last. Once power withdraws, what remains is exposure. The building is no longer insulated by authority. It is subject to interpretation. Its meaning is negotiated rather than imposed. This condition is neither inherently weak nor inherently stable. It depends on context that the estate cannot shape. Oheka Castle now persists within a cultural economy that values experience over governance. Its endurance is tied to attention, not allegiance. Interest must be renewed. Engagement must be sustained. These are volatile forces. They fluctuate with taste, memory, and relevance conditions, far less predictable than the hierarchies that once protected the estate. The form endures because it can be maintained materially. Stone can be repaired, grounds can be landscaped, systems can be updated, but power is not a material. It cannot be restored through conservation. Once removed, it does not linger in walls or proportions. It survives only through practice. This separation exposes a fundamental limit. Architecture can carry the imprint of authority, but it cannot recreate authority on its own. Without a system to activate it, form becomes referential. It points backward. The castle becomes a container of memory rather than an instrument of order. The unresolved question, then, is not whether the building can survive. It has already proven that it can. The question is whether survival alone is sufficient to sustain meaning over time. Form without power relies on continuous reinterpretation. Each generation must decide that the structure matters. This requirement marks a shift in vulnerability. The estate is no longer threatened by economic collapse alone. It is threatened by indifference. If attention fades, if relevance diminishes, the logic that now supports the building weakens. Preservation depends on desire. In this sense, retreat trades certainty for exposure. Authority once insulated the estate from changing values. Now, those values determine its future. The castle exists at the discretion of a culture that does not owe it deference. And yet, this condition also reveals the success of the retreat. The estate remains present, admired, operational. It has avoided erasure. It has translated dominance into endurance. Few systems manage this transition intact. Oheka Castle stands as a lesson in how power concludes itself, not with resistance, not with collapse, but with careful withdrawal. The structure absorbs the memory of authority while releasing its demands. The building no longer governs. It persists. It waits. Whether form can continue without power is a question the estate cannot answer. It can only demonstrate the terms under which such survival is possible, for now.